President Trump met with Ahmed al-Sharaa, the self-declared acting president of Syria, in the White House with some of his henchmen that showed up as well. So what is President Trump doing meeting with a guy who just a few years ago was a wanted al-Qaeda terrorist, a guy who spent time in prison in Iraq during the Iraq War trying to kill American troops? A guy who said when he was asked about it recently, take a look.
On 9/11, at the time.
Anybody who wasn't happy in the Arab world on 9/11 would be lying. So what is President Trump doing meeting with a guy like this? And after we talk about that, we're also going to talk about, is the United States going to build a military base in Gaza? This is a rumor that's come out, was reported today in the Jerusalem Post, and we're going to break that down for you and help you understand what's going on with it. This is the Jerusalem Post report. U.S. considering plans to build a large military base on Israel-Gaza border. They say it will be capable of housing thousands of troops at least. Some reports say 10,000, some reports say 20,000. This is not to house American troops per se. That's the most important thing to understand here. This is not going to be 10,000 American boots on the ground or anything like that. The base that they're talking about building, number one, it's not going to be in Gaza. It's going to be next to Gaza in Israel, on Israeli soil. It's there not to house American troops. It's there to house troops from the Gaza Peace Force that President Trump is proposing. The Gaza Peace Force is up to 20,000 troops coming from a bunch of different nations. You're talking countries like Indonesia, the UAE, Egypt, of course. Egypt wants to lead the Gaza Peace Force. Turkey has said they want to be involved, but Israel has a veto in any countries that would be involved here. And Israel has already said that's a red line for us. We will not allow Turkish troops on Israeli soil in any way, shape, or form, including in Gaza. So Turkey cannot have a role in being a part of this force. All in all, they're talking about maybe 10, 15 different countries, including like Canada and countries like that, that will have troops there as part of this peace force. It will be overseen by the United States, according to the plan. And the United States has already established a peace force coordination center just outside the Kerem Shalom crossing into Gaza. We know that there are already a couple thousand U.S. troops in Israel at the present time. They're not, by and large, anywhere near Gaza. Most of them are at the Dimon site near Dimon, Israel, where we have a radar base that has a huge antenna array that feeds into the THAAD missile systems. We've actually had troops there for a long time. A couple hundred troops have been there for years, just running that base. It's much more robust now because we've moved in more THAAD missile batteries, Patriot missile batteries, and that radar base is very important for gathering intel on incoming drones and missiles to Israel. I don't know exactly how plugged in that system is to Israel's Iron Dome system. I know it is plugged in. I just don't know to what extent. One of the other things we're going to talk about today is Iran threatening that in the next conflict with Israel, they will fire over 2,000 missiles in a day at Israel. Now that's quite a bit more than the couple hundred missiles that they were firing at the height of the 12-day war with Israel. And spoiler alert, I don't think Iran has the launchers to do that. The United States is talking about building a military base, according to the Jerusalem Post report, that will house up to 20,000 people. The base itself, according to the report, will cost $500 million a year, $500 million a year, quite costly. This will be to house the Gaza Peace Force that is supposed to be put together from a coalition of nations led by Egypt. Once Hamas is dissolved and disarmed, and Israel will pull out in stages while this peace force takes over in stages to keep the peace in Gaza. The United States says that they will fund the construction of the base for the large part of it, a couple $2 billion a year all in, probably a couple $2 billion a year all in, and a large part of that, I would say at least half, would come from the United States. Now, this is something that's been tried before with the Palestinian Authority. The United States, for years, has been paying American policemen to take leaves of absence from work or after they retire, go over to Israel and go into the West Bank areas of Judea and Samaria and train Palestinian policemen. Since this war has begun, there have been at least 4 incidents where some of those police officers from the Palestinian Authority who were trained by the United States have taken that training and the weapons that we gave them and have used those against Israeli civilians or police or military. And they have killed several Israelis in the process. I think a lot of Israelis would be just fine with just annexing the whole thing, calling it all Israel, and giving the Palestinians the ability to leave if they wanted to and go somewhere else. But the world's not going to go for that. The United States is not going to go for that. So eventually Israel is going to have to turn over the security considerations in Gaza to another force. And nobody really wants to do it. They have floated this idea of a combined joint peace force multiple times throughout this war. But President Trump has been pushing very hard for this, and it looks like we are closer to having something like that put into place now than we have been at any time in the past. Now, this is going to be a long, drawn-out process. It'll probably take 7 to 10 years to rebuild Gaza. But in the meantime, they're going to have that force put together. So if they're going to build a base outside of Gaza for all these people, they're going to have to get on it. I would venture to say that it would be far cheaper just to house all of these peacekeepers in hotels in the southern part of Israel. The Israeli government has been doing that for refugees from this fight, internally displaced people from the north and Kiryat Shimona and other places, from the south, anywhere near Gaza. Israel's small enough that even if they had to commute an hour to work, that's not out of the realm of possibility. So that puts any hotels that are in Ashdod or Ashkelon or Beersheba in the mix. This base, if they end up building it, is going to cost a lot of money. Now, if the world was a fair place, the United States would contribute know-how, consultants maybe, but this whole thing would be overseen by Israel. And if Egypt wanted to be a part of that, because they're going to have troops on the ground. The problem is you can't put American troops or even Israeli troops long-term in Gaza because you just make a target out of them. And there's no guarantee that if you put Egyptian or Saudi Arabian or Jordanian troops in there, that they would not be a target. The Palestinians will tend to attack pretty much anybody that's in there. The other problem is that when you're giving money like this, a lot of it gets siphoned off for corruption. And I'm not going to criticize President Trump for doing his best to put something together because somebody has to do something. So we'll just have to keep an eye on this and see what happens. All right, let's move on to al-Shara's visit to the White House yesterday. This is Ahmad al-Shara, Qaeda terrorist, shaking hands with the most powerful man in the Oval Office yesterday. He brought along some of his henchmen. They're also known terrorists. Some of these people sitting around al-Shara are known bad guys. Had worked with the Nusra Front, for example, have worked with Al-Qaeda. Certainly were all part of HTS. All 3 of those, the Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda, and HTS, are all designated foreign terrorist organizations. The White House has a Telegram channel and the Twitter handle and all that, where they put out videos, like 40 or 50 videos a day. Everything the president does. Putting out videos, putting out photos, putting out all kinds of information. And that's great. I love to see a transparent White House. They didn't put out anything from this meeting. They didn't talk about it. It was reported by the press, but the White House itself did not say anything about a meeting with al-Shara. And that's likely because they know that al-Shara is not a popular figure with many people in their base on the right in the United States. And it's telling, at least, that the United States, the White House, did not put out any video of this meeting whatsoever. President Trump didn't talk about what they talked about, but al-Shara did. Al-Shara gave some phone interviews after the meeting and said that they had talked about potentially joining the Abraham Accords. What he said was, we're not even going to talk about joining the Abraham Accords until Israel gives up the Golan Heights, in which that's not going to happen. Guarantee that is not going to happen. So I think the likelihood of Syria joining the Abraham Accords is pretty slim. What they talked about was the lifting of the Caesar Act, which is sanctions that were placed on anybody who did business with Syria. Those sanctions were put in place to try to cripple Bashar al-Assad, not to cripple anybody who came after Bashar al-Assad. So President Trump had temporarily lifted those sanctions, and shortly after the meeting with al-Shura yesterday, he extended that exemption for another 6 months. Now, some people are saying, well, if he really wanted to lift the sanctions, why doesn't he just lift them completely instead of just giving Syria a reprieve for 6 months at a time? Two reasons for that. Number one, there needs to be accountability on Syria. There's nothing that says al-Shura is going to just continue to be friends with America. He wants to get Syria back on his feet. He wants to reconstitute the Syrian army. He, of course, wants to consolidate his control on Syria and over the SDF, the Kurds that are controlling the eastern third of Syria. He wants to control all that. But should we completely remove the sanctions on Syria? Even if President Trump wanted to, sanctions can only be lifted by Congress. So Congress would have to vote on that. So President Trump is doing what he is able to do without Congress. I've made this before. The United States either will be a global superpower or we will not. If we want to be a global superpower, we have to be involved in the things that are happening outside the United States. If we don't want to be a global superpower and we stop trying to influence what's happening outside the United States, then someone else will do it. And someone else will be China, Russia, Iran, Turkey. And I guarantee you, if we let Russia do it and China do it, those rules are not going to be conducive to U.S. national security. Let's take the most optimistic picture of this that we can. President Trump is saying, look, the bigger problem in the region is Iran, Hezbollah, and ISIS. We want to defeat ISIS once and for all. We want to hamper Iran's efforts to be a threat to Israel in the region. And right now, the best card we have to play to do that in Syria is to work with al-Shura. The GSS forces in Syria under al-Shura have recently conducted more than 60 raids against ISIS targets all across the country. ISIS is still a force to be reckoned with in Syria. As a matter of fact, the United States held a forum over the last couple of weeks where they were basically begging other nations around the world to take back their citizens who are in Syria because they went there to join ISIS. ISIS became a problem in 2014, taking over large swaths of Syria and Iraq, calling it their new caliphate. The entire world came together to fight against ISIS. The United States joined a coalition of nations. We basically supported the Kurds while they went in and pushed ISIS out of northern Iraq and eastern Syria. Then we abandoned the Kurds, 2018, so that wasn't cool. The Kurds have been overseeing prisons in eastern Syria. The biggest one is called Al-Hol. Okay, so Al-Hol is right there just southeast of Al-Hasaka. Now, this entire eastern third of Syria is under the control of the Kurds. This whole part I'm circling here goes down the Euphrates River and up the Tigris River and along the Turkish border here, okay? All of this in here is controlled by the Kurds, not by al-Shura's forces. Al-Shura controls the western two-thirds of Syria in here. The town of Al-Hol is a very small town, like this. And what you see right here, this area I'm circling, is the prison camp for ISIS detainees. Right now, there are about 30,000 people, current or former ISIS members and their families, being guarded by the Kurds. The United States would very much like to see those camps closed down. Those fighters and their families, there are probably half of them in there are kids. And they've grown up. They were born in the camp. They've grown up in that camp. They've never left that camp, which is horrific. The pictures of it are terrible. I've been to it. I visited the camp a couple times. So the United States is, and a good percentage of the people in that camp are not Syrian. They're not Iraqi. They're from other countries. They're from Europe, from France, Germany. So the United States is trying to get France and Germany and all those other countries to take their citizens back. If you don't want to have ISIS members in your country, we understand, but it's very expensive and dangerous to have them in this camp because it's a hotbed for radicalism. And that's what this admiral had to say.
Earlier this month, I visited Al-Hol in person and saw firsthand the need to accelerate the repatriations. 18 nations, many of whom are represented in this room, joined under a combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve to halt ISIS. Military pressure continues against ISIS at large, but it does not resolve the threats posed by detainees or displaced persons remaining in these camps. Accelerating repatriations is both a strategic necessity and a humanitarian imperative.
There's another camp in Al-Hasaka. There are 3 separate camps where they have ISIS. All told, there are 40,000 ISIS fighters and their families. Of the actual military-age male fighters, you're talking about 10,000. Repatriating them, sending them back to their home countries would be the best part. Problem is, a lot of those guys came from Chechnya and Dagestan. Chechnya and Dagestan are not going to take them back. I've talked to many of the ISIS families in those camps. They would love to go anywhere except that camp because it's hellish. So it's a worthy goal to try to get these camps shut down. But if they shut them down by just releasing the ISIS fighters into Syria, then Syria's going to have a bigger problem. So the United States has been trying to put together a deal with al-Shara and his new interim government. Even though this guy, he's not elected, he just took power in a coup and declared himself the president. The United States has been trying to work with what we've got there to try to put together a coalition that will defeat ISIS once and for all. They are a bigger problem than HTS, than al-Shara is right now. But the concerning thing is that very often the enemy of my enemy becomes my problem. And so I want to talk about that. In the 1980s, the United States worked with the Mujahideen. The goal was to counter the Soviets. We partnered with Islamist insurgents. Some of them had very pro-American agendas and some of them did not. It ended up being successful in the short term. The Soviets were kicked out of Afghanistan at a great cost to them, but it led to the extremist networks that became Al-Qaeda that we eventually had to go and fight for 20 years in Afghanistan. So while it was a tactical victory on the battlefield, the strategic victory is much more muddy. Supporting Saddam Hussein for 8 years in the 1980s, we wanted to contain Iran. So we partnered with Saddam Hussein, the brutal dictator. It did weaken Iran. Long term, though, Saddam turned into the aggressor and a Gulf War followed. I think this example is the best example that we can look at in gauging what might happen with Ahmed al-Shara. So we work with Ahmed al-Shara now to defeat ISIS because we don't want to have a lot of U.S. troops on the ground. And so we're going to use Shara's forces to fight ISIS rather than our own forces. We support him by allowing him to rebuild his military capabilities, to consolidate power, to appoint former terrorists or current terrorists to important positions inside his government. We've seen just recently they were killing Christians down in the southern part of Syria. So basically, if we keep this guy close to us, maybe we can keep him from working out all of the jihadi goals he might have in his head. But what is the long-term cost going to be of this? What I can see happening is Ahmed al-Shara just deciding, I'm not going to play games anymore. I've already rebuilt my military. I've consolidated power. Our economy is booming. We've rebuilt much of Syria. And now we're going to move away from the United States and we're going to become an adversary to the U.S. once again and an adversary to Israel. So I think there's a great risk long-term in partnering with somebody like al-Shara. And there's no two ways about that.